Zack Polanski, you'll be attending the Remembrance Day rituals today. Why does this day remain relevant?
It remains relevant because we still live in a world that's particularly in global turmoil right now, where the threat of war remains ever constant. And indeed, whether it's in Gaza or Sudan, there are conflicts and genocides happening throughout the world. I think the important moment to stop today is both to remember the fallen victims, to remember the world wars we've had, and also to look ahead towards peace and diplomacy, and how we can work together across nations to make sure that peace is never taken as something that is complacent or a given, but actually is always an active piece of work to strive towards a more peaceful world.
When you say fallen victims, you do include the military, the soldiers in that?
Yeah, undoubtedly, people who gave their life for this country.
Your party wants to get rid of nuclear weapons, move to emphasis onto diplomacy, development, and so on and so forth. If Greens were part of a government, would we expect to have fewer men and women under arms by the end of your term of office?
Well, I think that depends what's happening in the world. I think it would always be foolish to assume anything about military budgets without knowing the political context you're working in. I would say more widely, though, if we're talking about right now, we've got a Prime Minister who's spending £15 billion on nuclear weapons and at the same time saying there's no money to lift the two-child benefit cap, for instance, something that's keeping 350,000 children in poverty. So I think it's right to question political choices at budget time.
Surely the deterrent is valuable in a world that has Vladimir Putin in it.
Well, I want to see everyone denuclearise, including Vladimir Putin. But ultimately, the only way you can do that is by showing...
But I have to say that would be in the realms of the miracle.
Well, you're laughing at it, but I think it's important that we don't laugh at peace. I think it's really important.
No, I'm laughing at the idea that Vladimir Putin is going to give up his nuclear weapons because somebody asks him to.
Well, you could have laughed at the point of Nelson Mandela negotiating with the ANC, or we could have laughed at the Irish during the Troubles.
You're not sincerely making the comparison. Come on.
I am making the comparison. I think it's always impossible until it's done, and I think it's really important. I don't think it's likely. That's a different question. But I think the first question has to be, do you believe that we can work for peace and diplomacy in the world? Do we believe that we can work with people that we have mass disagreement with, that are they're obviously created an illegal invasion of Ukraine? These are really serious issues. And at the same time, I believe we should never leave the negotiating table. And part of that is showing both the moral and courageous leadership to come on TV and say to you, even though this might be a position that's ridiculed, I don't think we should find peace and diplomacy ridiculous. I think we actually, the most brave and courageous and authentic to do is say, I believe we can have a world without war.
So Prime Minister Polanski would negotiate with President Putin?
Undoubtedly. I think it would be sociopathic behaviour to say you wouldn't negotiate with the President or a Prime Minister of any country.
Can I just ask you, before we move on, you're wearing the white poppy as well as the red poppy. What is the implication of that?
The white poppy began after the First World War, mainly from women's groups who were talking about peace and anti-fascism. So on the same day that we're remembering the fallen, it's also looking ahead to the future and saying we want a world of peace.
All right. Let's talk about COP, the climate conference in Brazil. Prime Minister's coming back, having refused to put British money into the Tropical Forest Forever Fund on the grounds that, frankly, we just can't afford it. He's right, isn't he?
No, it's absolutely outrageous. We often talk about the fact, or the Prime Minister often talks about, that there's no money left, but there always seems to be money for nuclear weapons. We just spoke about that. Since the pandemic began in this country, billionaire wealth has doubled, but our assets, our power and our wealth has been stripped away. And so when it comes to climate negotiations that are international, we need to look at the cost of inaction. And when we look at the Amazon rainforest, for instance, that's often described as the lungs of the world. These are vital resources, both for nature and for our well-being, but also ways of reducing carbon emissions and making sure we have carbon capture. So again, we have a Prime Minister who's spending billions of pounds on carbon capture technology and unproven technology at scale, but can't do the basic investment in making sure that we're protecting forests. Now, he's gone to Brazil. I'm pleased, but what's he gone to Brazil for if he's only gone there to say, oh, I'm not going to give you any more money?
Yeah, but if he were to put money into this kind of thing, I guess he would say, there's your tax rises right there.
A tax rise?
Yeah. Or not. How do you pay for it? You tax tax people?
Well, we could bring in a wealth tax on multimillionaires and billionaires, just a 1% tax on assets of £10 million or more, and a 2% tax on assets of £1 billion or more could raise between 15 and 25 billion pounds. The wider point here, though, is about the cost of inaction. If we continue to allow both internationally and domestically carbon emissions to rise, we know we will face increasing wildfires and floods.
Oh.
These are both dangerous for people's lives, but also, if we're going to talk about the economy, they're incredibly destructive for our infrastructure and for getting around. And by the way, you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to the insurance companies.
All right. Well, you sound pretty disillusioned with the Labour Party. So perhaps we can just get one thing off the table. There will be no cooperation between Greens and Labour Party to defeat reform.
Well, I don't think I'm alone in my disillusionment. And in fact, a poll out yesterday showed that the majority of the population have completely lost trust in Keir Starmer. Now, this is a man who ran on the coattails of Jeremy Corbyn but ditched every single pledge before he was even in power. We've got the two-child benefit cap, the disability cuts, the genocide in Gaza. No, Keir Starmer is not a man I would be willing to work with. OK, so there will be no electoral deal, however informal, with Labour, even though the division on the left might let reform into number 10. Well, there's two things there. So in a recent poll just yesterday or the day before, Greens are actually outpolling the Labour Party. We're in 3 points ahead. So the real question you should be asking Keir Starmer is, will he stand aside to make sure that Nigel Farage isn't Prime Minister? But more widely, I was answering about Keir Starmer. I don't think Keir Starmer will be the Prime Minister at the next election. I think it's another question whether he'll even be an MP. And so will I work with a future Labour leader? Depends who the future Labour leader is.
Oh, who would you like?
It's not really for me to decide who the Labour leader is. What I would like to see is more and more people voting and joining the Green Party, which is why membership of the Green Party has over doubled in the last 2 months. I intend to keep helping make it grow.
OK, but a lot of people in the Labour Party who might fancy some sort of alliance with the Greens would be quite interested to know who they might support in the event that there's a vacancy that would make that alliance easier. Give them some guidance.
Well, I can give some examples. I think Nadia Whittome, for instance, would make an excellent leader of the Labour Party. I don't think it's something she's necessarily in her ambitions right now, nor would the Labour Party, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying, necessarily support that.
A left-wing MP, a very left-wing MP.
Well, I think you say very left-wing, but actually, when we look at what's happening in this country right now, look how far we've shifted to the right in terms of the conversation around migration, the conversation around privatising our National Health Service through the back door. I don't think these are very left-wing ideals, and I don't think that would be a problem if they were. But actually, what I'm saying is where the majority of the country are at, which is we should nationalise our public services, invest in our National Health Service, and tax multimillionaires and billionaires just a little bit more.
Well, tax multimillionaires and billionaires... only them? That's not going to raise much money. No,
so there's other things, like bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax. The reason why that matters is right now we tax earned income more than we tax unearned wealth. That seems absolutely outrageous to most people as a result of political choices, and we can make different political choices.
The Chancellor, it appears, is likely to raise income tax, maybe 1p, 2p, for everybody. Will your members of Parliament vote for that?
I can't demand what our members of Parliament vote for because they have a free vote, but I would say the principles that we're all standing by is that those with the broadest shoulders should face the biggest burden, and that doesn't make sense to do that across the board universally. People are struggling so hard right now.
So you don't want to rise an income tax?
No, people are tired and exhausted. Their wages haven't gone up, but food prices are going up. How can you make some of the hardest working people who haven't had a pay rise in years pay extra tax and allow multimillionaires and billionaires to continue not paying capital gains?
All right. Your party, probably of all the major parties, has the clearest position on this issue of gender identity and so on. You believe trans women are women. Was the BBC right to censor its presenter, Martine Croxall, for her eye roll at having to say the words pregnant people?
Well, I push back, first of all, and say it's not a belief. Trans women are women and trans men are men, and also non-binary identities also exist. And I think it's always important to be really clear about that. In terms of the BBC, they obviously have their own editorial guidelines. It's not for me to tell the BBC how to conduct themselves. In fact, it's for me to be scrutinised. If you're asking me my opinion, though, I think it's really important that journalists are independent and partial, and I think eye-rolling as a journalist is clearly an unprofessional thing to do.
I think she just said, if trans women are women, why don't we just say women?
If trans women are women, why don't we just say women?
Yeah, who needs pregnant people when you've got the word women?
Well, I think those are different questions to the question you're asking me, which is, should a journalist be eye-rolling? And I just think it's quite obvious, no, they shouldn't.
Zack Polanski, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.